In this video, I'm going to show you how I paint an atmospheric landscape in watercolor. I'm going to walk you through a 10-step process. In the order, the steps will be what paint, what brushes, what paper, miscellaneous material, how to prepare the paper, the sketching, before painting, what is the process, the first wash, the second wash, and the last one is the analysis after finishing the painting. Let's dive right into the first step. In terms of paints, I use tubes, watercolor tubes. In France, it's easier to buy Winsor & Newton professional quality. It's an extra fine with lots of pigments in the tube. You can also use other brands like Daniel Smith. In terms of color, I use Winsor Blue with the green shade. Here is the French ultramarine blue. Here is the cobalt turquoise, which is really good for water effect. Then we have alizarin crimson permanent. Here we have permanent rose, Winsor red, burnt umber, burnt sienna, new gamboge, which is a warm yellow, Winsor yellow, yellow ochre, and neutral tint. As you can see, I use mainly the three primary colors, meaning blue, red, yellow. I also use some earthy colors like burnt umber, burnt sienna, and yellow ochre. And for each primary color, I use a cool version, like here the Winsor blue, and I also use a warm version, like here ultramarine blue, which is a warm blue. On the red side you have permanent rose, which is kind of a cool red, and here the Winsor red is a kind of a warm red. With all those colors you can cover the full range of any color you want. For this painting I will only use one color. It will be easier to focus on the mix between the water and the pigment. In terms of brushes, I use mainly 4 brushes. 3 of them are mop brushes from the brand Raphael with the series 803, and the size are 3/0, the smallest one. The middle sized is the size 2, and the big one is size 4. It's sufficient for the size of paper I use, which is a quarter sheet. I also use a synthetic brush from Escoda Perla size 10, but you can use whatever synthetic brush. I also use a Raphael one, KRL model, size 10 as well, and the series is 869. The mop brushes will be very good for having a lots of water and doing the washes, whereas the synthetic brush will be easier for getting lots of pigment with little water and refining all the details, the small things. It will be easier with the synthetic brush. As I said, I use 4 brushes, but for the painting I will only use 2 brushes. It will be easier to follow between the mop brush and the synthetic brush. The mop brush will be used mainly for the first wash, and the synthetic brush will be mainly used for the boat. In terms of paper, I recommend to use Arches paper 100% cotton, cold pressed, 300 grams. In terms of quality, it's one of the best brands, but you can also buy Saunders Waterford paper. If you only start using watercolor, you can also use cellulose paper, but I do not recommend to use it too long because it's more difficult to control the water and the pigments. The washes do not dry very well and it's more difficult to add a second wash on top of the first one. For other material, I use a glass of water, a sponge to dry a little bit the brushes. I also use a water spray bottle to add droplets of water if I see that the wash is drying. And I also use a masking tape in order to tape the paper on the board. In order to tape the paper on the board, I will have to cut one bit of the tape and I will have to put it on the paper first, a little bit like that, and then I tape it on the paper first. Once it's done, I can gently press the paper to stretch it a little bit. And then I can tape the other side. And the last one. Okay, now we are ready to sketch. For the reference photo, you have a landscape, a seascape to be more precise, with a boat and some mountains in the background. So here, in terms of sketching, I will have to cut the painting in two, not in the middle, right into the middle, but a little bit more on the top of it. I have the horizon line and I have the mountain in the background. You really have to be gentle with the pencil because otherwise you will see it through the watercolor. So you have to be very gentle here, almost not touching the paper. You have one first mountain here and the second one is a little bit smaller. In terms of composition, it's better to have mountains not at the same size. Then for the boat, we can simplify the boat to have a really simple one. Okay, that's fine. Now the painting process. It will be a two-step process with two washes. The first one will cover the whole sheet of paper. With the sky, we will blur the mountain because they are in the background. They will be blurred and we will add more pigment here and here at the horizon line, and then we will add pure water and it will blend the color downwards to make a kind of reflection, and then the water will be darkened with the blue color in order to get the feeling of water. In the end, we will add a little bit of straight lines with almost pure pigment in order to give the feeling of wave. Then we will dry it and we will paint the boat, the guy, the fisherman on the boat, and the painting will be finished. Yay! Let's start with the first wash. I will have to wet my brush. I use the mop brush for the whole first wash, and I use the blue color very light for the sky. As you can see, if you are careless, it's better in watercolor. The more careless you are, the better. In watercolor, you have to be quick and efficient, meaning that don't spend too much time on the sky. We have to go downward, and the paper is tilted by around between 10 and 20 degrees in order to have a rivulet here of water. It's better to control the wash here. I will stop at the horizon line, and as you can see here, I have stored some water. It's a good thing because then I will keep on putting more water until the bottom of the paper. Now I have to be quick to paint the mountain in the background, so I will have to take more pigment here and to paint directly in one brush stroke the mountain. Then I will have to add more pigment to put it at the horizon line. I will absorb some water here and here. And I will put more pigment here. Okay, that's fine. Starting from now, I clean my brush. I now have almost pure water, and then I can move downward. I also clean again my brush, and I can move downward. I have to be very gentle on the paper. And I can add more water here. Then I can add a little bit of pigment here. With more pigment to define a little bit more the horizon line. Okay, now I have to move downward with a little bit of blue. I have to add more pigment as I go downwards. More and more pigment. As you can see, I add more pigment. Always more pigment, never less. Here it's fine. And here I can still go back while my wash is not dry. Okay, now I will have to add more pigment, always more pigment. That's very important. Otherwise, you will not get the watery effect. And at the bottom, it's almost more pigment than water. Okay, now I can use my synthetic brush to go back with almost pure pigment and create the wave here like that. I press a little bit, not too hard, and the waves are bigger when you are closer, and they are smaller as you go further. Okay, now we are done with the first wash. I absorb some of the water here because otherwise you will get some bloom, the cauliflower's effect. I can use some paper towel to absorb all the water. I can also go back, once it's a little bit drier, I can go back and add more waves. With pure pigment. Okay, we are fine now. We let the water rest a little bit. If you want to speed up the drying process, you can use a heater, which is what I'm going to do. Now that the first wash is completely dry, I can paint the boat. This is the second wash. It will be only located in this area, so you have to take your time, you have to be very gentle, and you have to play between more water, more pigment to add some nuances in the paintings. I start with a very light blue for the boat, for the body of the boat. Then I can add more pigment to help define the edges. I work wet in wet. While it's still wet, I can still work on the edges. Then I can paint the fisherman. He will be almost pure pigment. And then I can start adding the reflection. While it's still wet, I can add the reflection. I have to be very careful here. Very light reflection. A little bit too much pigment. little bit more. I have to go with pure pigment to define the limit between the boat and the water. This part is very important. Then I can help this pigment to move downwards a little bit. I smooth a little bit the blending. I can dry my brush, take more pigment, help refine a little bit, and here I can also define we are almost finished here. We can add more pigment on the fisherman. And that's it. The painting is finished. Now the last step is to take the tape off. There is an order to take the tape off. You have to take the last bit you put on the paper, otherwise, and you have to stretch it out of the paper. If you stretch it this way, there is a risk that you will rip off the paper, and it's not what you want. Second one is here. That's it. Now the last step is to analyze your own work to see what has been working, what conveys an atmospheric mood, and what can still be improved. Here, as you can see, the mountains in the background are blurred, and it has a nice effect. Here you can see the reflection of the mountains on the water, and it's also fine. And here the waves clearly define the water. I could have put a little bit more here and there, but still we can read the water fine. And for the boat, it's okay. It was a good idea to have that kind of reflection because it breaks the wash a little bit and it add more interesting things for the eye to wander around the painting. Here the boat sits on the water. It's clearly defined by the dark line here, so it was a good idea to add it before it dries completely. And here, as you can see on the boat, you have little bits of white paper. It's a good thing because it will break the boat a little bit. You will not have a big mass of color, and it's a good thing to do like that. Here you also have bits of white paper. You can almost add small boats here with very light blue, and then you will have a background with some boats in a far distance. This painting has been made with only one color, but I can show you a different version of the same painting with different colors. Here you can see a version of this painting. It's a different one, it's a different boat, but the scene is almost the same, but it's a warmer version. Here it's more a blue, pinkish, blue-red with purpley waves, and as you can see, it's still an atmospheric landscape. The mood is very different. And here you have also the original version. It's not a mountain, it's a little bit more complex with houses, with temples and so on, but still it's a cooler version here because it uses blue and yellow mainly. This is why we have a greenish color, but here it's also a different mood. And so as you can see, we have very different kind of mood, even though it's the same photo, it's the same reference. So you can play with colors, you can play with the background, you can have a hard edge instead of a soft edge here. You can test a little bit. The most important thing here is to understand how to blend colors, how to have soft edges, hard edges, how to play with between water and pigments. And in that way, then you will be able to create atmospheric landscapes in watercolor. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you found it useful. Don't hesitate to ask me any question I could have not answered, and by email at remy@remylac.com, or you can directly write a comment in the video in the comment section below. Thank you for watching and see you next time.